Kaho. Okay. Well, kaniko hola. Komako bati aloha nui ki ia o ko I koko hiki kino ana mai ia nei ma ke ia koleke o manono o ke ia hale o piko hale ke pili hale ke ia me kela hale I o he halau ia o kolihua ia ma nei no hoi kako e hana nei ia o ka hula o ia ke kapua no ka holomua ana o ka ikena o ka Hawaii. Yeah. Pela e ko'uluai noa ko ke ia ana. Yeah. I want to welcome you to Hawaii Community College, and this is our Manono campus. We're one of 10 campuses within the university system, and this house is named Hai Manoa, Hai La'aka. We just started, so you're not truly late.
Cool.
Have a seat. Aloha. Aloha. The University of Hawaii system is going through a very, very exciting time for most of us. In that it is what we call, it's going through a process called Hawaii Papo Keao. It's the name given to a process to indigenize how we serve our community through the university system. So it's no longer just you want to learn things Hawaiian, you come to the program, Hawaiian Studies program. Now, programs in all disciplines are beginning to indigenize their curriculum. We're beginning to make sure who we hire is appropriate to our communities, meaning have you worked with indigenous people before? Have you worked with diversity? Is that you only have a degree and I'm going to give you a job? We need to have some proof that you can work well with diversity. So there's all different kinds of layers of how we grow or the transformation. Together with Gilmakua Kanilani, who's on her phone, we were on the camel once at the Giza Plain in Egypt, and she was looking for Wi-Fi. There was only dead people buried in the sand. But in any case, Gail and myself belong to the task force, or actually it's like a committee that advises the presidents and the chancellors, the upper tier leadership, on how it is that they can take ownership of the process and not leave it to one or two people to do it, to Hawaiianize the campus, but really grow programs, advocate for the betterment of indigenous and largely diverse communities in the academic forum. So it's a very exciting time. This gathering tonight is it takes on many facets. It's going to take on many kinds of laulima, many hands to help transform the university and how the university thinks. This is one of a number of programs where we use hula. And not hula, the research in the books, but hula in the bodies of people to help inform us of how did they learn from their teachers? When did they learn? Because sometimes hula is taught differently over the ages. Who was their teacher? When did they learn? Why they would learn? How did they feel when they were learning? And how was hula, what of the hula world or the culture of hula we can use to help advance what we need to do here in the university? Like, how do you teach Hawaiians? How do you teach non-Hawaiians? How do you teach the confused? Hula sort of kind of figured something out, and we can actually learn from that. But also, how is hula very fluid? Meaning that hula is much more flexible. How hula comes down to the generations. There's a beautiful flow, and it's not as sterilized or what is that word? It's not so stuck in one way. You got to deliver it this way. Sometimes people like to say one way, one way, one way. But when you look at the actual practice, you find that there are many, many ways that hula is taught. And so we brought together this group of people. We all descended. These, except Auntie Sherry, she belongs to a different generation. It's a little bit closer to Mount Sinai. But the three on the side of her were actually my hula brothers president's sister, and Kekui just married me because my weddings were just quite perfect.
It's true.
It's true. But, we all, Unukupukubu, we descend from this group who descends from Pua and Nalani and Edith, and even before Edith, from Auntie Kalei and Kekuela, it goes all the way back to Hi'iaka. And then we left the doors open to the Kuahu over there to remind us that sometimes Kuahus come and sometimes Kuahus go. Sometimes they're present and sometimes they're not present. Or sometimes they take on another form. But hula is always about being connected to the environment, connected to each other. So, with that said, I just want to make a couple of announcements. There's 2 more presentations, very similar to this. One of them is March 8 and 9. We are having Mr. Kimo Keaulana, Alama Keaulana, coming from Oahu, who received a lot of kinds of hulas. Unlike us, who mostly receive from one halau, he received from many, many great people at this time. And he's coming to share specifically the dance tradition that he learned of the Ilala Ole tradition through Mary Pukui. And so we'll be talking about, and that tradition comes from this island. But how was hula taught in an urban setting? Isn't that interesting to investigate? And then we have another one. Kamola is doing a hana ho with Kalani Akana and Hokulani Holt, and they'll be talking about how hula was taught in the 80s, 70s, 80s via the hula workshops. You know, where they were no longer your students, lifelong students, halau students, but there were people from different halaus coming in for a short period of time to learn a hula or two. And how did the hula masters back then entrust the dance, the chant, and the culture to people they probably meet only one time in their life? Or, you know, just not even their students, and not even a lifelong commitment. So that too is an interesting thing to see how our people did it that way. So without further ado, we would like to present our lady to all of you. Welcome again. Kekuni, take it away.
Aloha nui a kako. So, I'm the facilitator. That's rough. It's rough. But I think we're just going to go through some really, really basic questions. And I think when the time has here now, and would like to ask a question when the panelists are sort of, while they're reflecting, not necessarily all the time. Then just raise your hand, and we have guiding questions, 13 of them. But they may not be the questions you need to hear the answers for. So here we are. We're going to start. We're going to start. Can each of you introduce yourselves? Where are you from? And when you started Pula?
I am Sherry in Kalua. I am from Keaukaha, born and raised in Keaukaha, and I started Pula when I was 5. I'm going to be 78 this year. So that's the gist of my Pula, and I started with Aunt Edith's cousin married Fairly Hao. She had the Kalealoha Pula studio, and she taught at Keaukaha at the branch house, which was behind our church in Keaukaha, and we would practice every day. And the way we learned it was you sing, I show you the motions, and you dance. You know, it's not like how we learn it now. We learn the words, you know, and we know the motions for each word, and then you learn the steps, and you learn the motions. But we learn through them showing us how it's done.
Say aloha to Auntie Sherry. We're going to come back to that learning technique because she demonstrated it for us. Okay.
Kimala'o, Alice Taylor. I moved to Hawaii from the mainland in, what year was that? 1969. And fell in love with this island and the people. And I did not have any knowledge at all about the culture or hula until I had some other immigrants from the mainland drag me over to Kona to see Iolani Luahine dance. And I said, which one is she? You know, I didn't know anything, anybody. And all of a sudden, this tiny, thin, little gray-haired woman got up. And I said, what, she's going to dance? She was all adorned. She had her kine, she had her leis, she had her entourage, her whole family was there. And she got up, and she was an old lady. To me, I was only 33, which was older than most people who start hula. But she got up, and she stood there for a moment, and was breathing, and she opened her arms, and she looked up. And I saw something happen. I saw it was like a miracle. I saw she transformed. She changed in front of my eyes, and she began to dance like she was 12 years old. She could move. She was so agile. She was so full of the spirit that I was so deeply moved by that I just had this feeling that I wanted to know what that felt like. To have that spiritual, deep meaning in your dance and in your life. And that was my beginning, because I asked her where I could learn that kind of hula in Hilo. And she said, you must go see Auntie Edith. And I said, Auntie Edith who? And she said, Kanapa'ole. And I go, how do you spell that? And when I came back to Hilo, and I asked my friend Kaho, I have to find Auntie Edith Kanapa'ole. He said, oh, she hasn't taught hula in years, and she's going to start in 3 weeks. So if that wasn't a Ho'ailona, wow. For me, it was, like, this was it. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And that changed my life. total.
When did you start?
1975. And then I never stopped.
She never stopped. She's still dancing.
Aloha, Kamala Shah. Honolulu, born and raised, Mo'ili. That's, what shaped me, the city shaped me. But it's interesting because Hula was kind of part of my family, but it wasn't quite. My sister, my female cousins, and that's my auntie, and before. And I knew that in the family, Hula was there, because we weren't necessarily exposed to it. On my father's side, my grandmother's nieces, Hula taught Hula for many years. And then on my mother's side, her cousin, Kuchikun, was a performer of Hula. Her name like Kuchikun. I guess that's a little better than Ethelman. She taught Hula also. It's very interesting. So Hula was in the family, but I wasn't in our family. We weren't necessarily exposed to the family Hula, which is kind of interesting. But it wasn't until we were, Paula and I, both were at Kamehameha, and in our teaching year, one of our pastors, Frank Kahala, got together a group, basically for the warriors, giving something to do. It was called Lahuio Nahopio. And if anybody knew Frank Kahala, he was very creative at that time. He was writing his own songs, he was writing his own melody, he was choreographing his own hula. He was from Kahanazaa. And so it was very interesting because for a whole year, I was like, I think I was the only non-boarder at that time. And so that was kind of my beginnings, I would say, with the kind of a structured halal. But then we graduated, became a PDO. And I remember before, at my graduation, high school graduation party, one of my sister's classmates, my oldest sister, so we're like, she was teaching at Kamehameha. This woman named Zella came to the party and she said, when you're in Hilo, you should go see, we have to go to them and connect with Auntie Hilo coming from over. So it happened when I came up to Hilo. She was teaching at the university. This is back in 1975. And she taught here at the university. First she started with the community colleges and she did some classes for the full institution. And I was living in the dorm at that time, and Kyle was living at home, but he had this old 66 Diana station space. And I told him one day, Kyle, because I had talked to Anthony and I told Anthony, I asked him if I could join for a club. And then she said, you come this day and we'll see. And so I told Kyle, can we go to the halal? Anyway, I hope you're able to drag him along. I don't think he was really into it, but maybe you were. But anyway, so we were able to start with the halal that time. It was kind of interesting because when you think back then, it was very humble beginning. We were in the old Hakka building, which is where Cafe Pesto is now, upstairs, before they renovated the whole building. Since the buildings upstairs, there was a dentist's office, there was a sewing shop, and then there was Palau Kikuhi in one room, and there was Itilani School Studio in the other. Itilani Nahilo was there also. But it was very humble beginnings because the room wasn't even bigger than this. But it was very, I mean, it was great. I don't know, you want me to stop there?
That's fine. Yeah, yeah. So I want you to observe how the question is answered. It's the full context of the life way at the time that they started. I love it. Carlos.
It's so full of so much history, yeah?
Yeah.
Things to share. My name is Kawamakani Elia. I'm from originally from Kauelia, Putan, which is on Kalapana Opinka. Our family moved out to Pahoa when I was kindergarten. But raised, with Kukuhelepo, Coleman land, and all that stuff. But so we grew up in Pahoa, and in third grade, 1966, my mother had me go to a hula lessons with my 4 sisters. But there were 6 of us, 4 girls, 2 boys, and I'm like number 4. So curious, I went, but I had to wait till all the girls was finished before my kumu, Victoria Wright, she was Victoria Nuhi Wright. Yeah, she was my kumu at that time. And I had to wait till all the girls would talk. And she would teach only me. I was the only boy, the only guy in the hala. So I stayed for a while until it was like, she's junk. My mother, she's over there. My mother, she's sitting back there. My mother would take Ilani Kawayoshia area. Anyway, so she made me go. So I got jumped, so I never let go. So I did something else. Then we got into Kamehameha School and met Kamuala. And then Frank Kahalo was my roommate in Kaleo Papador. For those of you who know Kamehameha. It just turned into a boys' dorm after a girls' dorm. Okay, so Frank was on the same floor as me. He was in his special room that had a fire door. So if there was a fire, he would save and we all die. He formed the halal, the borders halal, because I was a border. It's called halal Lahui o Naopio. And it's through his creativity of dance, chants that we learned and followed. And we started to do performance. A lot of the word of the Manakyo period that we were dancing. And that was my first exposure into performing into a big public. My first exposure to dancing hula was in Pahoa at the Puna Hawaiian Organization annual luau, and my hula I had to dance was Anapao. And it was me and this other guy standing because we danced. And everybody was laughing and laughing and laughing, and this is junk. But wondering why they were laughing. And later on I learned that the choreography from Auntie Victoria Wright and the song and the melee was depicting, what it meant. But as a third grader, you don't know. You just do, right? And you listen to the kumu and you sing and you dance and you dancing and everybody is laughing at you. I think some of them have thrown some coins. So that was my first exposure to dancing to the public. And then Halau Lahue o Naopio at Kamehameha. And then we graduated. Kamuala came to Hilo, and we were very close. Took him everywhere, and I followed him. He said, "Let me check out this halau." Okay. So went and walked up the stairs, had 2 flights, and went to this room. And we checked it out, and that's how I got started with Halau Kikuhi. At that time.
Where was that? What year was that?
75.
Same time. Yeah.
Actually, 76, about January,
76, yeah.
January, February of 76. So we were new college students in September of 1976. 1975. School started in September. I was a community college business education major. I was supposedly,
What was that?
I was a business. So that was it started in January, February of 1976.
So Carl was talking about his first public performance. So you want to talk about your first public performance? What was it like? What was the context of the performance? What was the most memorable moment?
I remember the crater. Auntie had, there were like 5 of us. There weren't any dancers, and I had just started. I wasn't dancing for more than 6 months. And we were out of the crater, and we had to dance in the parking lot because she couldn't walk in. And we waited for the group that we didn't know would go on the ceremony. They all came out, and there was Yolanda Winnie. So I had my brownie camera, and I took a picture. Anyway, it was just an amazing time because there was just like 5 of us, and we did Kulaloa and Alimahu, and then these other 2 women from Kapu, because Auntie would go to Kapu to teach Olan and another woman, and then yes, and they came down also, and they danced in the parking lot with us. And it was like, this was an amazing feeling, to be dancing hula for Auntie. And all these people all around, it just was amazing for me. I was so new.
Yeah.
And
6 months at the crater.
Yeah. And at that time too, I was just learning about how to make a way. And Paul Wilson had to teach me all that stuff. She was so kind. But Auntie was so generous and kind and big-hearted, and I didn't wanted to do anything I could for her, and she wanted to do this at the crater. I didn't know that this was an annual thing we would be doing for years. Every year we would go and rededicate ourselves. Yeah? So that was memorable.
Yeah. And to share, what was one of your most memorable public performances?
Well, we used to dance at the Hawaiian Village, the one at Shopala, which is now just a parking lot with the bathroom. But there used to be a pavilion, and we used to go down to perform. And the halals come out, and you're all dressed up, and you're ready to dance, and then somebody decides to cry, and you don't want to go on stage. And we had all of that kind of, things going on. It never happened to me because I love working out there. But, my feeling at that time was I really loved the hula, and I enjoy it even up to now. And Ilalo Post, when they came on board for the halal, was when Kikuhi and Kuikui were little, and my 2 daughters danced with them. See, so when I came and I met them, it was they were students and my children were students, and then you come back to the halal. My first performance was very exciting. You get so excited because you really want to do your best, for your kumu. And even if we had one kumu, there were several other kumus that belonged to Kilkahan. One was Rose Kumu, and then we had Jack Brandt and his wife, Holly Brandt. They used to do Taishin. And we were able to learn from all of these other people. And at that time, there was no such thing as brutality at school or at halal. And if you didn't bend down, you get the bamboo on the back of your knee. So, you know, it wasn't abuse at that time. You either do it or out the door before. But that's what made us be good dancers, and it became part of the wanting to feel the dance or the music. And then when you perform, you know, you just got it all. It's not a show-off thing. It's just you have it in you, and you have to love it and make it seem as though you're telling your audience that you love it. You know, and you want to convey that message to them. And that's how I learned the hula, and I love it even now. I don't dance, but I'm dancing next. You know, I'm trying to do because I just love the music, and I feel so amazed at watching other people do the performance, and then you can tell if they're not doing it with their heart, you know, and if they're doing it only with their mind. You can remember all the motions, but if you don't love what you're doing, you're not conveying anything to your audience. You have to love it. And so that's one thing I really learned, and I love it. But my first performance, I was so proud of myself.
So I'm just sure, how old were you at your first performance? Because I can imagine my village, and I was there dancing in 74, 75, 76 too, or we were still there dancing.
Yeah.
And what did you look like? What was your dress, and what kind of, which dances did you do?
We did more Awanas, maybe some Kalikos, but more so the Awanas, because it was mostly for the people that came from the ship, the Lurleen. We don't remember the Lurleen, the Mansonia, you know, and there were the old ships. They used to come, and at that time they had little huts that were made of kiwi grass, and they were all in that village. And some of the ladies from the community would sew lace, and they made jewelry from the drove steers and the horses, and they sold their wear over there, and then we got to perform at the Hawaii village. So that was, you know, a learning experience for the tourists that came, and then learning experience for us because we had to convey, you know, what it was. And you know, when you watch the old movies, yeah, and they have of the island, you hear the steel guitar and all that, you know, and then you see all those little huts, and you see the hula dancers. We were a part of that, and then we branched out a little bit more by participating at the ship. When the ship used to come, we used to perform on the dock. When the ship was coming in, we perform, and when they leave, we perform. And you know, they throw all the streamers and I was a little girl, yeah. So it was really, I enjoyed it.
Mahalo. So, come on, do you have a memorable experience?
I have a lot. Sure.
Yes.
Just a side, sorry.
Yeah.
So Kibaloho, college, I met in school, well, even in high school, met Kibaloho and Tula. But this woman here, I got a call from my cousin, and she told me, you know, your cousin passed away. you better go to the school. Okay, who's that? His name is Ned Stevens. And this is her father. And this is the first time I ever met my cousin. This was years ago, my father passed away. The down from there. It's like, the connection with me. We make connections through we make connections with our life. And what we do with those connections are important to who we become and our relationships with each other, how we want to relate to others. For Hula, there's so many memorable performances. Like Kiwama was mentioning, every year at the start of the Obi Festival, the halal would go up to Kiwama to perform. But there's something special about it. It wasn't necessarily this commercializing, but for us as dancers, it was an experience that you just had to have gone through. If you ever been to the ledge, it's this gravel, rocky road, long pathway all over to the lookout point. And we'd be walking out there. We get there, the ceremony, the whole blue, everything, the investiture of this board is all done, and then the halal would perform, and we would dance. On this rock. But you wouldn't think about it. Every one of us would dance. Not until we all did our best. And it wasn't until actually we get off and walk from we get off there after we walk up. We get up to the asphalt parking lot, all the people saw it. But all the time we're up there, you don't think about it. It's as if, well, not as if, but there's something that focus. It's like you transcend. You become part of that environment, but you transcend to the state of being able to just accept it and just kind of feel it. There are many memorable experiences. For a number of years, the University of Hawaii in Manoa used to have what's called Kanikapila. They had it when I was in high school. It was an annual musical event. The halal was invited, and he was invited to perform, and we opened up. I'll always remember because it's an outdoor amphitheater. The lights were shining, and this is where Angie performed. And Nalani and Kua pulled out with her, and then we walked out, and then we came out too. There's always a magical experience to dance when I do around. So there are many magical experiences that I have. But I think, well, maybe I'll say this. I'll say this for later. Okay. So, well. I think, for me, all of these experiences, especially with that, has taught me a lot of things. Because when I see how she looked at life, how she looked at Hula, there are many things that happen where she would kind of, just kind of ponder, and how she would relate to it, I've always found very interesting. I'll share with you one instance. At Marimata, in the early years when it was at the Citadel, there was one of her cousins who brought his halal down from San Francisco, I think, California something. And they came out. He kind of quickly paced around the whole shouting out, Kawa! 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 And then their hula, the girls came out and they did this hula key. Everybody, you look at everybody in the room, they didn't know what was going on. But you look at Auntie. Auntie had this certain look in her eye where she understood what was going on. Whether it was appropriate or not, she understood what was going on. And so I think what I got from her throughout all the years that I was able to spend with her was how to look at something through a different lens, through an appropriate lens. Yeah. But it's more than just a hula. There are times when we went, come, do you remember with us up in Portugal?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll share it's kind of related in the sense that what we've gone through our training in hula and what we see is that we were Auntie Edith was asked to assist with the transition of Mo'okini from to install Lady Mo'okini as the caretaker of the couple. Even though the family has always been there as the couple. And so early in the morning, we were out there with Auntie. And it was the most interesting experience because we weren't privy to see what was going on within the ADL. It was a private ceremony, but when we did get into it, when it was our time appropriate, we got in there and we did what we were assigned to do to add to the sacredness of that ceremony. So it's things like that from what we learned to look from. When I say training, it's not just the training, but it's not just the dance itself, but it's the attitude, it's the understanding, it's the mental awareness, it's the our trying to sense what's happening, being awakened. So it's that I think we've been fortunate when we were with Auntie to have experienced. So that when certain ceremonies like that occurred, we were ready to participate.
So, and we are lifelong, engagement with hula has sort of makes, when you're invited into ritual, whether you're in the leadership role or not, it's as if the physical training in the halal and the attitudinal training and the spiritual training has prepared you to step into the ritual, not just the ritual guided by someone else, but ability to design ritual at some point. Did you, Kawa, did you find at any point in your hula career or in your profession or even in your practice as a Hoiwa person for many, many years, did you find that to be true?
The hula, actually, with Hoiwa, is very, very the same.
Yeah.
Almost. It's just a different kind of implement.
Mm-hmm.
But the mentality, the unity, the halalike, everybody kokua, it's in there with the Hoiwa. In my professional life, hula had opened my eyes, helped me to be very patient, very tolerant, very, like Kamala's Auntie, which is a different lens. Initially, you're going to say, make that frown when we look at. Then afterwards, we look at it in a different light. So in my life, it had led me in that way. My professional career, as far as employment. I paddled and coached paddling for I think 25 years. I've been with the Halal Crew for I think 26 years. So, Kamala is talking about the experiences. In a lot of the protocol experiences, I remember there was one occasion we went down to Waikoloa Village, Waikoloa Resort, where there's a King's Highway that crosses the entrance of that road. And I think Mabel Tolentino was in charge of the lobby. There was going to be a group from North Kohala or South Kohala that was going to meet a group from North Kona at the boundary line on the old highway by this owl, this huge owl. And we just happened to, I don't come well with it, I just happened to be there, and they were short of two guys, two or three guys, two guys. And he said, come on, Makani, and okay. We all take the malo, whatnot, let's keep on. And then you just have to get into that conduct, that mindset, that this is it's a ceremony. It's very heavy. You need to go in there with discipline and focus of what your intent is. Because we have to walk on about half a mile down this the King's Path in the hot sun. And I don't think we had slippers. I don't remember, but it was young, so I don't think we got anything. But it was on that kind of spot, and you would just sit and even like the Mo'okini Heiau, to be asked to be tapahu in the Heiau. Early in the morning, I mean, it's still dark. The moon is setting over Maui. It's a very full moon. And we were I forget who the other, I think it was Manuye. So we just happened to be in her Hawaiian language class. So she asked us to read the pub. And Kamala said, you have to just be in the moment. You have to discipline. You have to focus on what your intent is. Who you are as a person, the individual, you don't exist. You become the implement of that whole procedure. Because you want this to come through with goodness and everything. So there were a lot of moments like that with NTE that, I guess she felt confident. She believed in us. And I remember she asked me to teach an intermediate men's class at Kamimia School, Konya building. It was a hula workshop. And NTE was with Nalani for the advanced, the Kumus. So I thought, I'm sure. So I had about 20 intermediate guys, and I taught them Popuna and Halimamama. And of course, scared, can you teach, these students? And these students are, adults, that been in hula and they know their stuff and everything. So you're going to be questioned. And so I taught the class, relying on all the teachings that was done to us, given to us. And then he would come once in a while, sit down on the chair by the corner, and then just leave. But again, that kind of moment where she asks you, how can you say no? How can you say no?
And I'm sure it's very similar to what you're supposed to go through now with your pool. When your pool asks you to do something, you're not going to say no, right? I mean, same thing with that. If she asks anything of us, it's because she had enough faith that we'd be able to do it.
Just didn't believe in ourselves enough. But after the workshop was done, there's a hutuke, and there was an auditorium. And on our way home, that Auntie Mackenzie's house, she grabbed me and she hugged me and she says, "I'm so proud of you. You might let go." I was like, bawling up. But you just do what you are to do, and to remember who you represent, where you come from.
So we've been talking about at the performance level and sort of the performance into the ritual level. So I want to back up a little bit, and Auntie Sherry, could you talk about, well, you were learning hula from Auntie Clay, could you talk about what a typical hula day would look like? Like, you get up and you go into the...
When we go into the
Yes,
hula,
yes.
then we have to, when she comes in is when we know we have to begin, and it's through, some of us, you just keep playing, yeah, or you just keep talking, and she used to say, okay, now we have to start, and then she just starts, and then we do we practice, and then we do our, and what I found out was, when I went back to hula as in the hula, what's it, the Makua Lani, but the Makua Lani itself. Yeah. When I went back to hula and Inalani would go over and tell us to start. She did it with the ipu. Okay, when we started with Mary, it wasn't, she didn't do it with the ipu, was either the ukulele, she packed the back, because no ipu, so you make use of what you have. And then after Mary went to, later on she went to the mainland. She moved to San Francisco, and then we had Auntie Edith, and then she was our teacher. But Auntie Edith was, she's a very, she wasn't, to us, she wasn't old because she was our teacher in church also. And she could hang with the young kids and hang with the older ones, and we'd all be, we never thought of her as being an older person. She was just one of us. So it wasn't easy because she just blended in with us. But when we started hula, she would go through our practices, and when I learned in the Makua class, we did it all in Hawaiian. See, Nalani folks had, the band was kaholo, and then they have all the different motions, kalakaua and wawaika and all that. We never learned it in the Hawaiian sense. We learned all the English because we weren't allowed to speak Hawaiian in school. So we had to speak English outside of school also. So we went to Kyoka school, we learned Hawaiian, but when we went to middle school and high school, Hawaiian was not allowed to be spoken. So we had to learn everything in English. So when I went back to hula in my older age, it was hard to figure it out. I know what they're saying. When she says kaholo or what's not, I know what motion I have to do or what step I have to do. But if you ask me what step am I doing, I don't know.
So if Auntie Clay would say, okay, vamp.
Yeah, then we vamp.
Play on the ukulele.
Yeah, on the ukulele.
And then how you change How do you change foods then? How she tell you?
Or then she tell you, the kalakao, or she would say we had to pivot, or we had to,
Pivot.
yeah, or you just, coffee.
Coffee.
Yeah, you know, like, coffee.
Yeah, coffee.
It's called in the English form coffee. And so when they say, kalakawa, and then you go, oh, what is that? And what's the pivot? You know, so I have to redo my, your mindset has to be redone. And so I actually, when my children started dancing, I had to go and learn again with them because you have to learn what they were doing. And I knew what they were doing, but when I say one word, they said, not that, Ma.
So,
Not that.
so how long were you dancing in Antiquity before you transitioned to grandma?
It was, when I was intermediate. But then we did performance. We were, what was her name? The one that did, we did our performance at Marimana, was at the Civic. And who was the first Marimana? Aloha Deliri. Yeah, she and I are the same age. So she was the first hula, Miss Aloha hula. And that was when we were dancing with your grandma. Yeah, we were dancing with her. But was at the Civic. See, that's why I said, oh, I remember that. But I was having my children, so you stay out after that, and then you watch your children dancing. And so by the time I went back to hula, I was in the Makua class.
Yeah. So then, when you re-entered hula and began learning and when was that? That was like 2 months. I don't know.
That was
10 years ago?
I think.
About 10 years ago.
Yeah. And already my Manai was here.
Yeah.
Then Kamoni was dancing, and then my granddaughters are dancing. So the halal.
So just a little bit of sort of hula genealogy context. The woman that we're talking about, Mary Kalealoha, Kiahilihau, was my grandmother's. She was the eldest of that generation, cousins, dancing cousins. And so the rights to the halal passed to her. The rights of the halal from Grandma Fuji, who was also married Kekuewa, Aniena. And then, but then Auntie Pele went to the mainland, as Auntie Sherry described. And so upon her, so there was an absence. And so Grandma began teaching in the community.
And he was a good teacher because if we couldn't learn, like many of us, some people cannot do reading or whatnot. She would tell you a story and she's doing it with you, and no sooner you're done with it, and you don't know how you did it.